Don't skip this. Last night your soulmate's feelings changed forever. Stay with me for a moment longer than you normally would, because this isn't a message meant to rush past you. This is one of those moments that asks you to slow down, to breathe, to listen not just with your ears but with that quiet place inside you that always knows when something real is happening. Last night wasn't loud. There was no announcement, no dramatic scene, no obvious sign that the world had shifted. But something inside your soulmate did change, and once a feeling changes at that level, it never truly goes back to what it was before. While you were living your night the way you always do, maybe distracted, maybe tired, maybe still carrying questions you don't say out loud, your soulmate found themselves thinking about you in a way they hadn't allowed before. Not the surface-level thoughts. Not the familiar loop of confusion or avoidance. This time it went deeper. It touched a place they had been protecting, even from themselves. They didn't plan for it to happen. It came quietly. In a pause. In a moment when there was nothing to distract them. Maybe it was late, when the world finally went silent. Maybe it was early, when their guard was still down. But in that stillness, your presence showed up in their mind, not as a question, not as an option, but as a feeling that demanded to be acknowledged. And that's where the change began. For a long time, their feelings lived in a kind of safe gray area. Not fully denied, but not fully faced either. They could label them as confusion, timing, circumstance, or distance. They could tell themselves they were unsure, that life was complicated, that emotions didn't need immediate answers. That gray space felt comfortable because it didn't require a decision. Last night, that gray space collapsed. They felt something settle in their chest, heavy and undeniable. A realization that didn't come with panic, but with clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't shout, but stays. They realized that what they feel for you isn't temporary. It isn't something that fades when ignored. It isn't something that can be managed by distraction. It's something that has roots now. They started replaying moments they hadn't given full weight to before. The way you listened without trying to fix them. The way you noticed things others missed. The way your energy felt different, not demanding, not chaotic, but steady. They realized that your presence in their life didn't create noise. It created space. And that scared them. Not because the feeling was bad, but because it was real. Real feelings don't stay contained. They ask something of you. They require honesty. They demand alignment between what you feel and how you act. And that's where your soulmate had been hesitating for a long time. Last night, they couldn't hesitate anymore. They saw clearly how much effort they had put into keeping things unchanged. How often they had chosen familiarity over truth. How many times they had avoided sitting with their own heart because it was easier not to feel too deeply. And in seeing that, they felt something shift, not away from you, but toward you. This wasn't a rush of infatuation. It wasn't excitement. It was recognition. Recognition has a weight to it. Once you recognize what someone truly means to you, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to pretending the connection is casual or undefined. You can't unfeel the way their absence would actually matter. Your soulmate felt that last night. They imagined what it would feel like if you weren't in their life at all. Not as a dramatic goodbye, but as a quiet absence. And that image landed hard. Harder than they expected. harder than they were prepared for. It made them realize that losing you wouldn't be neutral. It wouldn't be something they could rationalize away later. It would leave a mark. That's when their feelings crossed a line. Not into obsession. Not into fantasy. But into something grounded and permanent. The kind of feeling that doesn't need constant attention to survive, but also doesn't disappear when ignored. You may not know this yet, but your energy has been changing too. You've been pulling back, not out of anger, not out of manipulation, but out of self-respect. You stopped filling the silence. You stopped carrying the emotional weight alone. You stopped trying to interpret every small sign. That change didn't go unnoticed. Your soulmate felt the absence of your effort more strongly than they ever felt your presence when you were trying. That absence created a mirror. It showed them what the connection looks like without your constant emotional contribution. And suddenly, the balance, or imbalance, became impossible to ignore. They realized that you weren't asking for too much. You were asking for truth. And truth is the one thing they couldn't keep avoiding. Last night, they admitted something to themselves they hadn't said out loud before. That their feelings for you aren't something they can keep in the background. That what they feel isn't confusion, it's fear. Fear of stepping into something real. Fear of being seen fully. Fear of choosing and having to stand by that choice. But fear doesn't cancel feeling. If anything, it proves its depth. This doesn't mean they woke up today as a completely different person. Change at this level doesn't work that way. But it does mean the internal narrative has shifted. The story they were telling themselves about you is no longer convincing. They can't call it just a connection anymore. They can't call it bad timing the same way. They can't call it uncertainty without knowing that uncertainty is a choice. That awareness stays. You might feel it today in subtle ways. A heaviness you can't explain. A sense that something is moving even though nothing has been said. A feeling that the air between you and them is different. That's not imagination. Emotional shifts don't need permission to be felt. Your soulmate is now standing in a place where feelings demand alignment. Where continuing as they were would mean actively denying something true. And denial at that level creates tension. It shows up as restlessness. As distraction that doesn't work. As thoughts that keep circling back to you. They are trying to understand what this means for them. For their life. For the choices they've been avoiding. They are realizing that feelings changing forever doesn't mean everything must happen immediately, but it does mean nothing can stay the same. And here's the part you need to hear clearly: this shift didn't happen because you chased it. It happened because you stopped abandoning yourself. Your calm. Your distance. Your decision to step back into your own life. That did something no amount of words ever could. Now, the next phase isn't about forcing anything. It's about allowing what has shifted internally to reveal itself externally, in its own time. Your soulmate may reach out differently. Speak with more weight. Or hesitate because they feel the pressure of what they now understand. Either way, something irreversible has happened. Their feelings crossed from potential into truth. And truth has a way of surfacing, even when people try to hold it down. This is only the beginning of this chapter. What comes next will depend not just on what they feel, but on what they're willing to do about it. Feelings can change forever in a single night, but action takes courage. Stay present. Stay grounded. Stay with yourself. Because when someone's feelings change at this level, the universe doesn't leave things unresolved for long. Stay with me, because this part is where the change that happened last night begins to echo into everything that follows. This is not about sudden messages or dramatic confessions yet. This is about the quiet consequences of a feeling that has crossed a line inside someone and refuses to go back to sleep. Your soulmate woke up today different, even if on the outside nothing looked unusual. They went through familiar motions, but there was a new weight behind them. A kind of awareness that doesn't ask permission. They realized that what shifted last night wasn't temporary emotion, it was perspective. And perspective, once altered, doesn't reset. They tried to distract themselves at first. That's human. People often test whether a realization will fade if ignored. They filled their time, their mind, their attention. But every distraction led back to the same place. To you. Not as a fantasy, not as an escape, but as a truth they now have to contend with. They noticed how often their thoughts returned to you without effort. How memories surfaced that weren't dramatic or romantic, but ordinary. Small conversations. Quiet moments. The way you made space for them to be imperfect. Those moments didn't feel small anymore. They felt foundational. This is where the fear began to deepen. Because they understood something uncomfortable, real feelings don't just exist. They require alignment. And alignment means change. It means letting go of patterns that once felt safe. It means facing the possibility of loss, not just of you, but of the version of themselves that stayed protected by indecision. Your soulmate is now caught between who they've been and who they're being asked to become. That tension shows up in subtle ways. Hesitation. Overthinking. Moments of silence that feel heavier than before. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much to act casually anymore. They are measuring their words now. Their actions. Their timing. Because they know that once they speak from this place, it can't be unsaid. Once they move forward, there's no pretending the feelings are undefined. And pretending was their shield for a long time. You, meanwhile, are experiencing something different. A strange mix of calm and alertness. You may feel less desperate for answers but more sensitive to energy. You're not reaching out the same way. You're not filling gaps. You're letting things exist as they are. That shift didn't happen because you stopped caring. It happened because you started respecting yourself. Your soulmate feels that. The absence of your emotional labor has created space, and space is where realization deepens. They're noticing how much you once carried. How much you smoothed over. How much you made things easier for them without asking for much in return. That realization brings guilt. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind that sits in the chest and doesn't go away. The kind that forces someone to reflect instead of deflect. They're seeing now that your patience wasn't endless. It was intentional. And that intention deserved clarity, not confusion. This is where the internal dialogue becomes intense. They ask themselves whether they are capable of meeting you where you stand now. Not where you were months ago, still hoping, still waiting, but where you are today. Grounded. Self-aware. no longer willing to live in emotional limbo. That version of you is different. And they know it. They also know that choosing you now isn't about winning you back or proving something. It's about stepping into responsibility. About showing up consistently, not just emotionally but practically. About being honest even when it's uncomfortable. That's a lot for someone who has relied on avoidance. So they pause. And in that pause, they feel the weight of the shift even more. They realize that if they don't move forward with integrity, they risk losing you, not because you'll leave dramatically, but because you'll continue moving forward without them. And that possibility feels more real now than it ever did before. You are no longer anchored to waiting. You are anchored to yourself. That anchoring has changed the power dynamic entirely. Not in a manipulative way. In a natural one. When one person stops abandoning themselves, the entire emotional field reorganizes. Your soulmate is feeling that reorganization. They may feel a pull to reach out, followed by hesitation. A desire to speak honestly, followed by fear of not knowing how to begin. When feelings change forever, language often lags behind. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to expose themselves only to realize they're not ready to follow through. And that's the conflict they're sitting in now. You might sense this as a kind of emotional pressure in the air. Like something is building. Like a conversation is approaching but hasn't arrived yet. That sensation isn't anxiety, it's anticipation mixed with uncertainty. Your job right now is not to interpret it. It's to stay grounded. The old version of you would have tried to resolve the tension by reaching out. By asking questions. By softening the moment. But that version of you no longer exists. You understand now that clarity can't be forced. It has to be chosen. And the person who needs to choose clarity is the one who created confusion. Your soulmate is now living with the knowledge that what they feel for you is permanent. Not in the sense that it dictates their actions, but in the sense that it will always exist as a reference point. No matter where they go, no matter who they talk to, no matter what distractions they pursue, the comparison has been set. You are the standard now. Not because you demanded it. Not because you insisted. But because of how you showed up, and how you stopped showing up when it cost you too much. That combination is powerful. They may test this realization. Try to rationalize it. Tell themselves they're overthinking. But the body doesn't lie. And their body knows something has changed. This is why timing matters now. If they move forward, it must be from truth, not fear of losing you. Not guilt. Not pressure. Those motivations don't sustain real connection. If they don't move forward, that will also be a truth. Either way, you are no longer waiting in the dark. You are watching from a place of clarity. And clarity doesn't rush. As days unfold, pay attention to how you feel, not to what you imagine they're thinking. Notice whether your body feels tense or calm. Notice whether interactions feel grounded or draining. Your nervous system will tell you more than words ever could. You don't need to prepare for every outcome. You're already prepared. Because the most important shift has already happened. You stopped placing your sense of worth in someone else's feelings. And that's why whatever comes next, conversation, action, silence, or movement, you will meet it whole. This chapter is still unfolding. The feelings that changed last night are now shaping the path ahead. But you are no longer chasing the story. You are living inside your own. And that is where real power has always been. Stay with me, because this part is where the inner shift that happened last night starts to collide with reality. This is the space where feelings, once changed, begin to press against the structure of a person's life. And when that happens, nothing feels comfortable anymore, not going forward, not staying still, not pretending things are the same. Your soulmate is realizing something slowly, in layers. The feeling that changed last night didn't just add something new to their heart. It removed something old. It stripped away the illusion that they could keep everything exactly as it was and still be honest with themselves. That illusion was their shelter. And now it's gone. They're waking up to the weight of what they've been avoiding. All day, there's been a sense of restlessness in them. Not panic. Not excitement. Just a constant low hum of awareness. The kind that follows you into conversations, into quiet moments, into distractions that no longer work the way they used to. They try to laugh, to focus, to stay present, but something keeps pulling them inward. That something is truth. They're seeing how much effort it took to stay undecided. How many internal justifications they built. How often they told themselves they were being careful, when in reality they were being afraid. Afraid of choosing wrong. Afraid of hurting someone. Afraid of losing control. And now they see that in trying to avoid pain, they created more of it. That realization is uncomfortable. It makes them question the version of themselves they've been operating from. It makes them wonder how long they've been living in reaction instead of intention. It makes them see that the feelings they tried to manage quietly have now outgrown containment. You didn't cause this by demanding anything. You caused it by changing. Your energy is different now. You're not hovering. You're not reaching for reassurance. You're not explaining yourself into emotional exhaustion. You're present, but you're not bending. Calm, but not absent. That balance is new, and it's unsettling for someone who relied on your emotional availability without fully reciprocating it. Your soulmate feels the difference in the silence. Before, silence felt safe to them. It meant no pressure. No decisions. No accountability. Now silence feels loud. It echoes with everything they didn't say and every moment they postponed. Silence has become a mirror. And mirrors are hard to face. They're also noticing how their thoughts about you have shifted. It's not just about missing you or wanting you near. It's about imagining life without your steady presence. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, realistic one. And that image doesn't feel neutral anymore. It feels like loss. That's when fear deepens. Because loss makes things real. They're realizing that if they don't act from honesty, the distance between you won't need to be announced. It will simply grow. And one day, they'll look up and realize you're no longer emotionally available in the same way. Not because you shut down, but because you grew forward. That possibility scares them more than they expected. At the same time, they're battling another fear, the fear of stepping forward and not being enough. Of choosing you and having to show up consistently. Of losing the safety of ambiguity. Ambiguity gave them room to retreat. Clarity does not. This is the tension they're living in now. And tension always seeks release. You might feel this on your end as a kind of emotional pressure. Not anxiety, but awareness. Like something is building behind the scenes. Like a conversation exists before it happens. That feeling isn't accidental. Emotional shifts ripple through connection, even when no words are exchanged. But here's what's different now. You're not trying to interpret it. You're not trying to control it. You're allowing it. That's a sign of how far you've come. You're spending more time with yourself now. Not as an escape, but as a return. You're noticing what your days feel like when they're not centered on waiting. You're noticing how your body feels when you're not bracing for disappointment. You're noticing how much emotional space you actually have. That space is peaceful. And that peace is non-negotiable now. You're beginning to understand that no matter how deeply you care, you cannot carry someone else's indecision anymore. You can't translate their silence. You can't soften their fear. You can't choose for them. And for the first time, that realization doesn't feel tragic. It feels relieving. Because it means the burden was never yours to carry in the first place. Your soulmate is slowly coming to the same realization, from the opposite side. They're understanding that you were holding more than your share of the emotional weight. That your patience was not passive, it was generous. And generosity, when taken for granted, eventually withdraws. They feel that withdrawal now. Not as punishment. As reality. They're also seeing how much they relied on the idea that you would always be there, steady and understanding, regardless of how long they delayed. That assumption is crumbling. And with it comes a sense of urgency they didn't feel before. Urgency doesn't always look like action at first. Sometimes it looks like discomfort. They're uncomfortable now. Uncomfortable staying the same. Uncomfortable moving forward. Uncomfortable sitting in between. And that discomfort is productive. It's the kind that forces clarity. You, meanwhile, are no longer afraid of clarity, even if it comes with loss. That's the biggest difference between you now and the version of you who once waited endlessly. You know that clarity, even when painful, is kinder than prolonged uncertainty. You're choosing truth over hope alone. And that choice has anchored you. You're not rehearsing conversations in your head anymore. You're not preparing arguments or justifications. You trust that if something needs to be said, it will be said. And if it isn't, that silence will speak just as clearly. This trust in yourself is new, and powerful. It means you're no longer negotiating your worth in your own mind. You're not wondering if you're asking for too much. You're not minimizing your needs to make space for someone else's fear. You know what you deserve now. And you're calm about it. That calm is what's changing everything. Your soulmate can feel it. Calm doesn't chase. Calm doesn't beg. Calm doesn't threaten. Calm simply exists, and in its presence, everything false becomes obvious. They're now faced with a truth they can't ignore. The feelings that changed last night will demand alignment sooner or later. They can try to delay, but delay will cost them. They can try to rationalize, but the feeling will persist. They can try to distract themselves, but the comparison has already been made. You've become the reference point. Not because you insisted, but because you stood still in your truth long enough for them to see it. This doesn't guarantee an outcome. It guarantees honesty. And honesty is the doorway through which all real outcomes pass. What comes next will depend on their willingness to act with integrity, not on how much they feel. Feelings alone are no longer enough. You understand that now. And so do they, whether they're ready to admit it or not. For now, the shift continues quietly. Inside them. Inside you. Between you. You don't need to rush this moment. You're not missing anything. You're standing exactly where you need to be. Grounded, aware, and no longer willing to disappear to keep a connection alive. That's not the end of the story. It's the point where the story finally becomes real. Stay with me, because this part is where everything that shifted inside your soulmate begins to press against the life they've been living. This is not about a message yet, not about a confession, not about a sudden move. This is about pressure. The kind that builds quietly when truth can no longer be ignored, when a feeling refuses to stay hidden, when the heart demands alignment instead of excuses. Since last night, your soulmate hasn't been able to settle back into who they were. They've tried. People always do. They wake up hoping the weight will feel lighter, hoping the realization will blur with daylight. But it doesn't. It sharpens. Because what changed wasn't emotion alone, it was awareness. And awareness has a way of turning routine into discomfort. They're moving through their day feeling slightly out of sync. Conversations feel shallow. Laughter feels delayed. Even moments that used to distract them don't land the same way. There's a constant sense that something important is unfinished. Not externally, but internally. Like a door that has been opened and can't be closed again. They are beginning to see how much of their life has been built around avoiding decisive moments. How often they've stayed in, almost, because it felt safer than choosing. Choosing meant risk. Choosing meant accountability. Choosing meant being seen fully. And choosing you would mean all of that. That's the part that feels heavy now. They are no longer asking themselves if the feeling is real. That question has passed. Now they're asking something far more confronting: what does this feeling require of me? And that question doesn't have an easy answer. Because the truth is, choosing you would require a different way of showing up than they've been used to. It would require consistency instead of convenience. Presence instead of distance. Honesty instead of ambiguity. And those shifts aren't small. They affect how someone lives, not just who they love. They feel the tension between the life they've been maintaining and the connection they now recognize as significant. That tension shows up as restlessness. As moodiness they can't explain. As moments where they catch themselves staring into space, replaying words, replaying your voice, replaying how safe it felt to be understood without having to perform. Safety is what changed everything. They're realizing that what they feel with you isn't about excitement or escape. It's about grounding. About being met without having to hide parts of themselves. About being seen in a way that doesn't demand perfection. And for someone who has learned to survive through control and avoidance, that kind of safety is both comforting and terrifying. Comforting, because it feels like home. Terrifying, because home asks you to stay. And staying means letting go of exits. They are now painfully aware of how much emotional effort you used to give without asking for clarity in return. How you waited without pressure. How you offered understanding instead of ultimatums. At the time, they accepted that as generosity. Now they see it for what it really was, trust. And trust, once mishandled, doesn't come back easily. This realization carries guilt. Not loud guilt. Quiet guilt. The kind that doesn't need to be named to be felt. The kind that settles in the chest and follows you around all day. They're feeling that now. Not because you accused them. Not because you demanded anything. But because your absence of effort has highlighted how much you once carried. Your stillness has done what your words never could. On your side, something important is happening too. You're no longer interpreting silence as a sign you need to do more. You're no longer filling gaps to keep the connection alive. You're letting things be what they are. And in doing so, you've reclaimed your energy. You may still feel moments of curiosity, moments of wondering what they're thinking or feeling. That's natural. Deep connections don't disappear instantly. But those moments don't pull you off center anymore. You come back to yourself quickly. That's the difference. You're no longer living in anticipation. You're living in presence. Presence has a gravity to it. It grounds you. It steadies you. And it quietly demands honesty from anyone who enters your emotional space. Your soulmate feels that gravity now. They feel that you are no longer suspended in their indecision. You're moving forward, even if that movement is internal. This forces them to confront a hard truth: if they don't step forward with integrity, they may not lose you dramatically. They may simply lose access to you in the way they once had it. And that kind of loss is irreversible. That realization hurts more than they expected. They are starting to understand that connection doesn't stay alive through intention alone. It needs action, alignment, choice. And those things can't be postponed forever without consequence. At the same time, fear is still present. Fear of failing you. Fear of not being able to sustain the level of honesty the connection now demands. Fear of stepping forward and discovering they're not ready to be the partner you deserve. That fear creates hesitation. And hesitation is what you are no longer willing to live inside. This doesn't mean you've closed your heart. It means you've set a boundary with yourself. A quiet one. A firm one. You're no longer willing to explain away inconsistency or wait indefinitely for clarity. You're choosing peace. That choice is subtle, but it's reshaping everything. You're noticing how your body responds to this new way of being. You're calmer. Less reactive. Less emotionally exhausted. You're not bracing for disappointment anymore. You're open, but you're not exposed. That balance took time to learn. And it's not something you're giving up again. Your soulmate feels this too, even if they don't have language for it. They feel that you are no longer accessible in the same unconditional way. Not because you're cold, but because you're grounded. And grounded people don't beg to be chosen. They choose themselves first. This is where the internal pressure they're feeling begins to peak. Because they now understand that the connection will either evolve into something honest, or quietly dissolve. There is no comfortable middle ground anymore. That realization is forcing them to ask themselves the hardest question of all: am I willing to change, or am I willing to lose something real? That question doesn't get answered quickly. But it doesn't go away either. You don't need to push this moment. You don't need to chase it. You don't need to prepare speeches or ultimatums. The work you needed to do, you've already done. You chose yourself. You reclaimed your energy. You stopped abandoning your needs. That choice set everything else in motion. What happens next will come from their willingness to meet you where you stand now, not where you were when you were still waiting. And that difference matters. For now, this is the phase of internal reckoning. Of pressure before movement. Of truth pressing against fear. You are not behind. You are not missing anything. You are not meant to do more. You are meant to stay exactly where you are, present, grounded, and honest with yourself. Because when feelings change forever, life eventually rearranges to match them. And that rearrangement has already begun.